So my name is Roger Berkowitz, and I want to welcome you all here. I am the founder and academic director of the Hannah Arendt Center here at Bard College. Some of you may know we just had our annual conference. It was called Real Talk, Difficult Questions About Race, Sex, and Religion. And it went really well. It was great. It's all available, by the way. You can watch it live streamed and now also not live streamed on our website at hac.bard.edu. And one of the things that I said at that conference, and I was hoping to be proved right about, which is that people said, oh, people are going to get really upset and there's one view and people are going to not want to express other views. And I said, you're going to be surprised at how many different views there are in this room. And a lot of people were. And there really was an incredible effort and ability to have an engaged, and come on, Larry, please have a seat. Have an engaged and civil conversation about very difficult topics of race, sexuality, and religion. It went incredibly well. We have these little mugs and things upside. The premise of the conference, and we do this with all of our conferences, is to think about how to expand and elevate the public discourse in the spirit of Hannah Arendt. Hannah Arendt, as some of you know, is buried on this campus in our libraries here. And in defending free speech, she didn't defend free speech as something to be, as something about self-expression, as it's often said today, or even about the marketplace of ideas, that we would somehow learn the truth by defending free speech. She said that only in the freedom of our speaking with one another does the world, as that about which we speak, emerge in its objectivity and visibility from all sides. Only in speaking with people we disagree with, in hearing views and opinions of peoples who are really different from our own, do we come to understand and know the world that we live in, which is a real, complex, difficult world, not a simple one. She says there are no truths in politics. All politics is about opinions. And I take that very much to heart. It's what underlies a lot of what the Arendt Center does. And it's also what led to this conference, to this little group here, and I'm thrilled you're all here. We're going through a very contested and bitter election. There's always disagreements, but there seems to be a belief by many people right now that if one side or the other wins, it will be Armageddon. Some of these people may think that about the other side. But we're all here to talk about it and do so in a engaged and civil way. And my hope is we're not going to have a debate, right? This is not a debate. This is going to be about a living room conversation. It's on that model. Bard has now started a dorm room conversation model run by a number of our students through the Arendt Center. And the premise of this is to have a somewhat curated, structured conversation where you listen to other people and hear their views and see what it means to hear people you don't usually talk to. And so we've invited a very distinguished panel of leading political thinkers from the left and the right. Two of them are very publicly supportive of Donald Trump, and three are supportive of Hillary or maybe someone else. The idea here was, some of you, I don't think it's unfair to say that this college, like many colleges of its type in this country, are largely liberal, and that Donald Trump is not a popular figure here. I've gotten a number of emails in the last couple of days of people thanking us for doing this, saying that they felt unsafe to wear Donald Trump hats on campus, and that they were happy we were doing this. I also got complaints that we were doing it on the same night as the Country Music Awards. And I honestly had no idea, and I apologize to those of you who may be coming to hear us and missing the Country Music Awards. I hope that doesn't bias our audience in any way. The World Series is here as well, and it just started, if you can shout out updates as you will. I'm just hoping for a really good game that I'll get to see the end of after the conference. Let me introduce our panelists and tell you a little bit about what we're doing. So right here to my left, which I like to say, is Larry Kudlow. Larry Kudlow worked in the Reagan administration in the Department of Budgets. He, for many years, ran the Kudlow Report TV show. He now runs the Larry Kudlow TV show and has a syndicated column. He's written American Abundance, The New Economic and Moral Prosperity, and the new book is just out. Is that correct? JFK and the Reagan Revolution, just released? Just released, JFK and the Reagan Revolution. I say that again? 180 station radio show. And his radio show is on 180 stations called? A form of retirement. He's slowing down. We see that happening. To his left is Walter Russell Mead, who, as many of you know, is a Bard professor, among many other things. He's a distinguished fellow at the Hudson Institute, and he's one of the founders and editors of the American Interest magazine. He also runs a very popular blog. His new book, coming out this summer, is The Ark of a Covenant, the United States, Israel, and the Future of the Jewish People. To his left, and none of this is politically meant, is Debbie Dooley. Debbie is one of the 22 national founders of the Tea Party. And I just have to always say this because it's true to me, the founder of the best named political movement in the country, the Green Tea Party, or the Green Tea Coalition, which is a coalition of environmentalists. I've been told not to say environmentalist, that's a bad word. Conservationist, a conservative idea of environmentalism, conservation group. So thank you for coming. She's here from Atlanta. Kevin Duong is an assistant professor of political theory and European politics here at Bard College. I should say he's also born and raised in eastern Kentucky. Tennessee, eastern Tennessee. One of those flyover states. So you see where my biases lie. I mean, it's way out there on the sleeve. Eastern Tennessee, and I think, like many of us, has interesting familial conversations around the election. And Rivka Galchen, who is someone I've known for a number of years. She is a fiction and nonfiction writer of essays for The New Yorker and Harper's Magazine. She and I have done shows together on Hannah Arendt, actually, for NPR and different stations. And she has a number of books out, including most recently a book called Little Labors, stories about adventures in child raising. And then there's Ralph Benko, who is my partner here in helping to organize this event. Ralph has recently been called by the Washington Post the second most conservative man in the world. He calls himself, to me at least, a paleo-conservative. I don't know what paleo means in this context. Who is the first, Ralph?
Well, that would be Benjamin Tzedakah, the leader of the Israelite Samaritan community in the Holy Land, living by 3,000-year-old pre-modern biblical code. He outranks me, yeah. But not in America, just in the world.
Yeah, so he's the most conservative man in America. But he's also newly appointed the president of the Saul Alinsky Center, not usually thought of as the most conservative center in the world. Ralph is a non-ideological, non-doctrinaire conservative. He's a community organizer and deeply believes in democracy and the power of the people. He's with Joan Blades, who some of you know is the founder of MoveOn.org, the founder, or one of the founding members of Living Room Conversations. So I wanted Ralph to say a little bit about Living Room Conversations, which is what we're going to have here, and then we'll begin.
Thank you, Roger. About 4 years ago, I coaxed Joan Blades, who with her husband Wes Boyd founded MoveOn.org, probably the most powerful progressive grassroots group in the country right now with 8 million members, 7,999,999 in good standing, and 1 dissident member, me. To meet with my friend Mark Meckler, who was the co-founder, principal co-founder with Jenny Beth Martin of the Tea Party Patriots, the million-member Tea Party group. And they were both terrified. And I said, come on, just talk to each other on the phone and get to know each other. I think we'll love each other because you both represent marginalized populations. You're both populists who believe in the power of the people and channeling the power of the people. And they slowly, diffidently got together in Joan's home in North Berkeley. Joan, by the way, born and bred in Berkeley. She's a total Berkeley hippie, and she still pedals around, she still pedals around Berkeley on her bicycle, and every weekend goes out playing soccer with her husband and the kid and the people she grew up with. Totally non-pretentious, wonderful, wonderful woman, full of heart and soul. So they got together in her living room, and they discovered that they had a great deal of camaraderie. They disagreed about a lot of issues, but they shared a lot of values. As a result of this conversation, they discovered that they both believed in criminal justice reform. This made the front page above the fold, took up the whole above the fold of the front page of the San Francisco Chronicle, bulletin, flash, extra, extra. Matter and antimatter collided and did not destroy each other in a huge release of energy, that the co-founder of Move On and the co-founder of the Tea Party could get together. And that tipped the first domino that led gradually over the years into a powerful, progressive, conservative coalition to reform criminal justice that was funded both by the Koch Foundation and by the Soros Foundation. The power of listening to one another with mutual respect, even in the face of passionate disagreement, is extraordinary. So I give tribute to Roger and Tina and the Arendt Center and to all of the panelists to come here to speak about what they like about their respective candidates and to listen to what other people have to say about theirs. The power of listening is transformational. Thank you, Roger.
Thank you, Ralph. So I really do want to emphasize that to me, this is an exercise in what is called sometimes deep listening. And I'd like that to be our ethic for tonight. There will be a time for you to ask questions after you can see we have 5 questions we're going to ask each of our panelists. We're going to go in order and then order and back. And then afterwards, there'll be a time for questions. But please, that's the spirit, deep listening. So we're going to start. The first question, and these are a variation of the questions that are used in the living room conversations and here at Bard in what we call the dorm room conversations. And I should say that if you're interested in dorm room conversations, you should talk to us afterwards, and we're trying to get that going really strongly on campus. So the first question is, what are your core values? Or if you want to think of it this way, what sense or purpose of duty guides you in life? And so I'm going to ask our panelists to go down and answer that question. Larry.
Well, thank you. It's a hell of a question. I'm glad to be at Bard College. I've never been here before. It's a pleasure. Glad we had a great turnout. The great Walter Russell Mead was a frequent guest on the Cudler Report on CNBC for many years, and I try to read everything that he writes. I don't know if we've met before, and I was one of the first guys to put Tea Party people on television way back when. Ralph is a very old and dear friend of mine, and I look forward to meeting the other panelists. So we're talking about core values?
Core values. What do you really believe in, or purpose that guides your life?
Well, I am probably fundamentally a person of faith. That is my core value. And I'm not here to tell my biography, and you're not here to listen to it. But if you know anything about it or you look it up later, I've been through my ups and downs, and I rediscovered faith, 20, 22 years ago, something like that. Perhaps I should say that I had a very successful career in government, Wall Street for a while, and then became an incurable abuser of alcohol and drugs. This went back to the early 1990s. And with a lot of help from a lot of people, including professionals, I managed to transform my life, again with the help of a lot of people. And that's a big part of my life. I pray every morning, I meditate every morning, and the really good news about that story is I'm sober and clean now almost 22 years, and first of all, I did it to survive. Second of all, I did it as a public service. And third of all, I did it because I didn't want to lose my wife. So I take no particular credit for it. I just did it. Lots of people do it. And I'm very active in 12-step programs, and I'm also very active in the Catholic Church on many different levels. So faith is a big part of my life. Beyond that, as we warm up and have our discussions and get into politics, I'm a great believer in freedom, enormous believer in freedom, whether it's economic freedom, personal freedoms, with limits perhaps. And I also believe in equal opportunity, I guess I'll put it. That's a vague term nowadays, but I was kind of a student or acolyte of the late Congressman Jack Kemp, and we were all from I don't know whether we were the liberal wing of the Republican Party or the supply side wing of the Republican Party, but we believe that everybody should be equal before the law, without discrimination, and we should all be at the starting line, as I say, with equality. Not the finish line necessarily, but the starting line. That's always been a core belief. I am, I might add, a former Democrat, which might interest you. And I left the Democratic Party in 1980 when I went to work for Ronald Reagan as one of his budget deputies. My last Democratic boss was former Senator, the late Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who taught me a lot. A lot of Moynihan people went into the Reagan administration. And I've always come to believe, now, Ronald Reagan was a Democrat, longtime Democrat. He used to tell us he voted for FDR 4 times, and he voted for Harry Truman once. And I voted Democrat for many years. And my book is about JFK and Reagan. And of course, JFK was a Democrat. And I've come to believe that in order to be a good Republican, quote unquote, you really have to be a Democrat to start off with. It's the only way to really understand that story. And I don't mean to be cryptic or elliptical, but I actually believe that. You kind of have to go through certain things in order to understand certain things. So, freedom, faith. I guess I'll add one other thing. I don't want to monopolize. I want to hear what Walter and the others say. I believe in economic terms or political terms in economic growth. I think for countries, economic growth as well as national security, but let's focus on the economy. Growth is the single most important thing for a successful, optimistic, happy society. You show me a country that is not growing and has a tradition of not growing, and I'm going to show you a poor country and a country with a lot of unhappy campers who live there. I believe that, and I've devoted myself to that over nearly 4 decades in government, Wall Street, and the last 20 years in broadcasting. And the Kennedy-Reagan book that I penned is all about economic growth. Last point, quickly. You were getting to this. In recent years, and particularly this year, I have been focusing on the issue of civility in American life, or the lack of civility. I will tell you, in my time, this is the worst presidential election I have ever seen. And I don't even want to divide up the goods and bads on the scorecard. I'm just going to tell you, it is the worst, least respectful, least civil, least calm, and least listening I've ever seen. And I'm spoiled because when I first came into politics as a young man, I was, whatever I was, 30, 31 years old, one of the budget deputies for Reagan. I worked for a guy who was civil, polite, had manners, and was willing to discuss issues with people who disagreed with him. He was a persuader and a communicator, and he liked to use facts. And if you disagreed with him, he was okay. Nowadays, if you disagree with somebody, you yell at them, you insult them, you don't listen to them, you smear them, you take the low road. And I can't stand that. Honestly, I cannot stand that. I wouldn't do it in church, I don't do it in politics, and I don't do it on TV and radio. And I'm very proud. When I had the CNBC show every night, until I couldn't do it anymore, we had Democrats, liberals on the show all the time, right? I'm a Reagan Republican, that's not breaking news. So we had disagreements, but they were polite and civil, always. And if people came on who wouldn't play by those rules, they never came on again. And I'm always proud to say, I'm not going to name names here, but many of the people, Democrats, left of center, who came on my show and still come on the radio show, wound up in very senior positions in the Obama administration. And I was very proud of them. And several of them wrote me notes when they were appointed, this is back in 2008, thanking me for giving them an opportunity and a platform to express their views. And I'm going to stop there, but civility is kind of a big part of my focus nowadays. And I hope if nothing else comes from this, we will wind up thinking about such things.
Okay, should I use this one or maybe this one? Okay. Yeah.
Split them up.
Well, I guess my position will be kind of like Larry's, only less interesting. Like Larry, I actually, when I looked at these questions, core value, I came to faith. I thought, what are my core values? To love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. Those, I would say, are the two stars I try to steer by, and the most important word in that sentence is try, because I fall very short, and I'm aware of that all the time. And I think it's thinking about why faith in a God who is bigger than you can possibly imagine and who contains in himself all qualities that you can only perceive separately and partially. Actually, I think that's an important part of coming to politics in a civil spirit, because that you'll never find, no one will ever find complete fulfillment in politics. There will not be a political leader who fully expresses all the truths that the human spirit is sensitive to. There will not be a society which achieves all the justice to all the people in the ways all of us would like to see. And yet you have an obligation to continue as best you can by the light that's been given you to struggle in the right direction. But with sympathy and solidarity, even with the people who disagree with you, because really you're all striving toward the light one way or another. When I think about what is my sense of, I guess one other thing is, there's nothing to remind you how fallible you are than faith in a God who is bigger than you, greater than you. You have a moral code which you know to be true, which you care deeply about, and yet which you're incapable of living by for 20 minutes at a time, and whose teachings resonate deeply in your heart, but daily remind you of how far you are from your own ideals. That's a lot of things, but one of the great things is it's a great preparation for political life and a great reminder of the need for civility and tolerance. In terms of purpose and duty that guides my life, actually I think of a line from one of the verses in the Bible that talks about, I've set you as a watchman on the wall. And if the watchman sees a danger and sounds a trumpet, that's your job. Sees the enemy coming, you sound the trumpet, that's your job. If the people inside the city wake up and listen and act, that's great, you've done your job, everything is fine. If the enemy comes and you don't blow the trumpet, then whatever happens to the city is your fault. But if you blow your trumpet and the people in the city stay asleep, then what happens is their fault. You're okay. You did your duty. So I think of myself as a watchman on the wall, trying to make clear when I see it dangers to the people in the city that I love, and doing my best also, I guess, to be a good member of the Watchman's Guild, the Night Watchman's Guild. That is training students, training young people, and others in their turn to take up this job of being watchmen. That's why I teach, that's why I write, and those, I guess, are the sense of purpose and duty that I at least try to live by.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to be here, and my accent is South Bronx.
Very South Bronx.
Very. No, I'm actually native of Louisiana. Went to the University of Alabama, Roll Tide, and I live in Georgia. I'm driven by three things, well, really four things: faith, freedom, family, and country. I'm a strong believer in individual freedom and liberty, and that is for everyone. It's one thing to say I believe in freedom and liberty, but no, I don't want them to have freedom or liberty, and I think that's wrong. I believe we must be respectful of each other's opinions. We all love, it doesn't matter if you're conservative or you're progressive. We all love our country. We may have a different vision of our country, but we all love our country, and we have the right to fight passionately for our views. I think that's something that's extremely important. I've put together coalitions with Common Cause, environmental groups, conservation groups. I received a democracy award from Common Cause in Georgia. I've worked together with labor unions, put together coalitions of left and right, working together and putting our differences aside. I believe in power of the people. I believe that the grassroots, the people of this nation, are our nation's real treasure. And that if we can put differences aside and respect each other's viewpoints, we can be much more successful. I am a strong advocate for solar. I support all energy, but I believe in individual freedom and liberty. I believe in free market choice. I support removing the government-erected barriers and allow real energy freedom and choice. That's why I'm a strong advocate of solar. I fight nationwide for that. I'm a founder of Green Tea Coalition and Conservatives for Energy Freedom. And many times I'm at odds with other conservatives. But many times conservatives agree with me. And I would encourage everyone in this room to look to your side and understand that that person beside you has every right to fight passionately for their viewpoints and the way they feel as you do. Thank you.
I hope this is working. Yeah, thanks for everyone showing up. I found myself sort of modifying my answer in my mind. I was listening to the previous folks, so I'm going to try maybe to build on what some other folks said. I am not a person of faith. I actually grew up pretty conservative, and I did grow up believing in God, but now I'm a pretty committed atheist. And I actually realize now that a lot of my political values are related to that. So I don't believe in an afterlife, and it's actually, I distinctly remember that it was a big reason why I moved to the left, is because since I don't believe in afterlife, it's deeply important to me that the one shot people have on the earth should be a just life. There should be a life with just jobs, with economic security, because there is not an afterlife that will vindicate the pain that people suffer in the world now. It's deeply important to mitigate the suffering that people have here. And it's that deep overriding commitment that there isn't going to be vindication in the end that really drives my commitments about justice and the indispensability of fixing the world as it is, fixing it for those who are currently living. And so I guess more specifically, I was politicized first through teachers when I was in college. Became a really committed feminist activist working on issues of sexual equality on college campuses. And pretty quickly, though, I saw that that was actually deeply committed to me becoming a communist. So understanding the democratization of the economy, the democratization of the workplace, transforming the places in which people live and work into places in which they can have fulfilling lives precisely because there won't be vindication later. So it's deeply important for workers to have control over their workplace. So I think a lot of my values, a lot of the things that, so I was a union organizer also when I was a graduate student, and that really consumed a lot of my emotional energy. And I think a lot of those commitments as an organizer really come from the fact that I think it's because because it's not really easy to justify the suffering that people have right now if you don't believe in an afterlife. And so I think when other people were bringing up faith, it really reminded me that actually a lot of my political commitments come from the fact that I don't have it. And that's why justice is really so important to me in the immediate world. So I think that might be my answer.
I also was slightly moderating myself just to sort of, and learning something about myself and putting myself in context, listening to everybody. I would say I wouldn't describe myself as a person of faith in the sense that, I don't have an idea of God in the way that I think many people of faith do, but I would say that my values, when I think about where they came from, and I guess these words are always feel insufficient, but kind of kindness, love, and reason. I would say form my values, and that they were really formed among a very deeply Christian environment. Although my own household was Jewish, I grew up in Oklahoma, which is a very religious state and a very conservative state, and I only am beginning to see it as an adult how key that was to my formation of my values, in large part because I now see that the way in which I was part of a foreign family and I was very warmly brought into other people's homes. My whole childhood, I went to church pretty much every Sunday, and I was sort of exposed to families who had, in a sense, very traditional Christian values of charity and giving and non-judgment. Almost all of the families adopted someone or worked with children of special needs. So in a sense, I feel like these values were formed in a religious context, even though it wasn't, the word faith doesn't really hold much for me. And then also reason, which is, I guess, something that many again, is sort of at issue what that might mean, but just that I do have a strong feeling that something can be achieved through rational thought. And that sounds like an obvious thing to say, but I guess that's why I describe it as a core value of mine. So that, and then on terms of what does kindness really mean, I was quite moved by the invocation of civility, and I'll say, I think like many people, I've felt less civil, even in basic ways, the sense that I think everyone has where you're walking down the street and you're angry at the person in front of you for walking too slowly and they can't see you. And that those sort of small incivilities of sort of not stepping out of the way on the subway, that those things are, that I guess that's where I think kindness is formed, in those tiny decisions, not to slam a door, to be polite, to treat someone with respect, that those are very key. That might be a better way, civility is a better way to say what that might mean, what kindness might mean.
Roger, I live by Virgil's Georgic Odes, Tempus irreparabile fugit. You have great minds here with mesmerizing stories, but may I ask you, in the spirit of living room conversations, to ask our speakers to present their next answer in 1 minute?
Yeah. I was gonna, thank you, Ralph. Yes, I mean, the core values part of this is very important because it reminds us that we're all here on a common project, and I think it's good that we gave that some time. We're gonna have to maybe do a little bit of dancing through these questions.
Little lightning round
But
here.
but this is actually an important question, and I want to make sure maybe a minute and a half for this one.
You are a true liberal.
Yes, you know it. Libertine is what they call me. What is just one thing, and we really are asking for one thing, that you really like about either Hillary or Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump as president? What do you, as president, what is the one thing you would really be excited about? Maybe we'll start, do you mind start the other
Do
way?
you want us to do the one we support or the one we don't support?
I'd like an honest answer. No, yeah, okay, but in this case, the one you support.
The one you support.
I like that Hillary Clinton is pragmatic, and I find it exciting that there would be a president, as there have been presidents in the past, who is getting something done, and maybe not always getting public credit for it. Like I admire that the first George Bush quietly, unilaterally began nuclear disarmament to no credit and and then I feel she's that kind of person, and that excites me. And in a sense, even on that same level of pragmatism, that she's not a charismat, and that she's going to do things that are less about defining herself, since it doesn't work for her anyways when she tries to. That's something that actually excites me and makes me feel good things can happen.
So I think maybe I'm approaching this from a kind of a weird angle, because I'm very much a supporter of Clinton, but mostly as a compromise. My support from her comes from the direction of the left. But one thing one thing that makes me, I don't know whether excited is the right word for this, but one thing that I'm looking forward to if she becomes the president is that I think under her presidency, somewhat similar to Obama, that there will be a lot of leeway given to a lot of maneuvering space for social movements. And that I think is really important, because I do generally think of change being driven from the bottom up, not the top down, and I think a lot of people here will probably agree with me. And I hope from her, and I think this would be true, that under her presidency there would be space for these social movements to have leverage against against the political elite. Because I don't think at the end of the day that because at the end of the day, I think that change comes from the bottom up, and so a president who maximizes that space for social movements that's a good thing for me.
See, we already agree on something. The change does come from bottom up. One of the things the main thing I like about Donald Trump is because he is a true outsider, and he will clean up and drain the corrupt swamp known as Washington, D.C. I think there has been so much corruption, and it's going to take someone that's brash to change things and get rid of the corruption in Washington, D.C., and I'm excited that he will do that. He has a good team around him that I'm very proud of.
Well, I can't say I approach this election with, I wouldn't say excitement is really not the word that's driving me, but you know, I look around the world today and I see we are in some ways easily the most dangerous point since the end of the Cold War, and perhaps for some time before that. It's been a long time since war between great powers was as likely as it is today, and the world scene was as dark. I think Secretary Clinton will go about trying to restore the foundations of the world order that we've all somewhat taken for granted. You know, it's going to be a difficult task. It's going to be, you know, there are countries who don't like us very much out there and who actually wish us ill. And in the last 8 years, or actually the last 16 years, they've become emboldened and empowered. And I think Secretary Clinton does have a pretty clear sense of what needs to be done overseas, and that's something I'm really looking forward to in her administration.
Do you really?
Yeah, I would say, I mean,
In terms of the clarity of
Larry, it's your turn to say something nice about Donald Trump.
No, I just, because of my enormous respect for Walter, particularly on foreign affairs.
I'll just say I have been with her in very small rooms where she said some things that I thought were pretty cogent.
Okay, no, fair enough. My view on Mr. Trump has been an ambiguous view from day one. An ambiguous view from day one. Look, my goal, as I said before, is to grow the American economy at the maximum rate possible. And we have been underperforming now for 16 years. I'd like to blame Obama for all that, but I can't. I can't. We've had Republican presidents and Democratic presidents. We've had Republican Congresses and Democratic Congresses, and they've basically all done a pretty mediocre minus poor job, okay? My book is all about this. I want to unleash American growth. I want to unleash American entrepreneurship. I believe growth solves poverty. I believe growth solves deficits. I believe growth solves debt. I believe growth makes us stronger overseas. So what attracted me to Mr. Trump at the very beginning was his statements in an op-ed piece that he wanted to reduce tax rates across the board. And so do I. With a particular emphasis on business tax rates, where we are nowhere near competitive around the world. We're losing companies and money, and that's bad. And also lower business tax rates for individuals, but large companies and small companies. That's really the key. We have never done that, never done that. And I believe if you unlock incentives, if you unleash the entrepreneurial spirits, we will do great, and we will regain our growth position around the world. I was in Reagan's administration when things looked hopeless, and it was changed. And my book chronicles John F. Kennedy, where things were awful after the Eisenhower years. Kennedy was the first tax-cutting supply-sider. That's the purpose of our book. Reagan took it up 20 years later. In both cases, it worked. And I want to give it another shot. I want to give it another shot. Now, just to finish this off, I believe Trump is sincere with the tax cuts that a bunch of us put together. He also wants to roll back excessive burdens of regulation, which I think is very important, particularly for entrepreneurs and small businesses. I think he wants to roll back the Obamacare experiment, which I think is done very poorly and needs radical reform. And I think he wants to unleash our energy advances as we move into the 21st century. That includes clean energy advances. I will say this. I do not agree with him on trade. I'm a free trader, always have been, and always will be, as Ralph knows. And finally, I do not agree with him on immigration. I think we have to have solutions to immigration. That is the American way. And I think immigrants, if treated properly, learning America, jumping through the hoops, clean criminal records, paying their taxes, should be allowed to stay here and get some legal status, because I believe they will help the country grow.
Roger, you're authorized to skip directly to step 5.
All right.
Step 4 is an emphasis of 3, which we've been through.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, step 3 is an emphasis of 2, and step 5 is
So
a summary
I'm
of
going to
step
ask
4.
then to do step 4 and 5 together, maybe. So step 4 was there anything that someone from the other side said that you appreciated? And step 5 was, in one sentence, share was what most meaningful or valuable to you in this experience, in this conversation. So
And
if
I
there-
let you win last time and give them all 90 seconds. So
Yeah.
you have to let me win this
You
time,
win this time.
and give them all 60 seconds in a spirit of comedy.
All right. In the spirit of comedy, so that we can get to questions, because I do want to have questions. In 60 seconds, either then, was there something someone else said that you found you appreciated, or what was the most valuable insight that you heard today? Do you want to start?
I'll just say, I heard a lot of discussion of civility on this panel. And I think that's terrific. I think it's a great starting point. If you and I can talk over our disagreements without insulting, name-calling, if we can do it with manners, maybe even factual-based conversations. It's possible. I've actually been there. We've done that. And respect and civil. I think that's a great thing, and it's a great place to start.
I guess I appreciated the insight, in a sense, or the sense that Trump is an outsider and that that's part of his appeal. If again, Larry and I were both sort of talking about a 16-year period when the establishment, whether being run by Republicans or run by Democrats, just hasn't been all that effective in solving a lot of the problems that people are facing. And so while I don't support Trump myself, I understand to some degree why so many people I actually like and respect have this hunger for somebody who isn't part of the regular political system to come in, and why they have so much hope. I'm not sure I actually share that hope. And I'm not sure that, in some ways I say, actually, in 2001, George W. Bush was the outsider coming to clean up Washington. Didn't have a lot of experience per se, but boy, he had good intuition. Barack Obama, 2008, charismatic outsider, no experience, but boy, did he have good intuition. Donald Trump. So while I worry about that, I do really think it's important, and I'm glad it was said tonight.
Well, I've liked a lot of things I've heard. You guys talking about faith and your book about Israel. You talking about the power of the people. You talking about being respectful, and how this election, I totally agree with you, how this election has affected other areas, because you are just real tense. I totally agree. So I'm very hopeful, because, I think this panel is a diverse panel, but I think we all agree there's other issues that we found common ground on. And I think that is very good.
So I was pretty happy to see, and really, even if we might disagree on the specifics, that everyone in many ways continues to believe in the people. I think that's an important value to hold, and even if we disagree on how to define the people or how their power is best exercised, I think that overriding commitment is really important to emphasize as something that I think everyone shares.
There were many things that moved me, especially referring to learning and teaching as part of the Watchman, because I sort of I like to hear that and think about that. But I also was very happy to hear someone who does support Trump, but made a special point to say that his policies on immigration you don't agree with, simply because that seems to have been very powerful and distressing, and it's nice to break down and give some nuance into the types and origins of support for him.
And he and I have had words about this, to put it polite, including on interviews. So my thought here is, you know, if you can, oh, sorry. You know, with these guys, I've been around all these things, giving policy recommendations. You win a few, you lose a few. If you can somehow push these folks in the right direction, it's a win. It's a win. Regarding Mr. Trump, who is a highly imperfect candidate, I would say the same thing about Mrs. Clinton, but we're on Trump right now. I think I won a couple. I'm not the only guy involved in this, but I think I won a couple. I think I may have moved him on a couple, and I think I've been defeated on one or two. That's the way I look at it. So, you know, it is what it is. It's funny. It's an imperfect process. We're talking politics here. Politics is a contact sport. It's a rough process. There are a lot of divisions in the country. And the trick is how to figure out to do what's best for America. That is the bottom line.
So I want to, first of all, thank all these panelists to come and talk so honestly and openly with us. So please give them a round of applause. And now I'd like to open it up. Now let me remind you, this is not a policy debate. You know, you can ask questions and we'll see where we go. But we really are interested in questions about why candidates are supporting, why people here are supporting their candidates. And I'll leave it at that and let you guys.
Roger, could you limit them to asking a question to one of the panelists rather than saying, I'd like all the panelists to answer this question?
So please
because
direct your questions
to give space for many questions.
at one of our panelists. And do we have a mic going around or not? Yes, we do. Can you move up to the front, Keegan, in the middle here, and then we'll pass it around? Is there a question? Marina, Professor Venezuelan. Keegan, can you run that mic up here? Oh, here.
Yeah, I'd like to ask the question to the gentleman to your right, Roger. You mentioned.
Larry Kudlow.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm not good with certain names. You talked about civility. I don't understand. I'd like you to explain to me how you could support a man who does not know the meaning of the word civility.
Good question. I could have asked that question. And from time to time during this dreadful campaign, I have gone ballistic at some of his misstatements, if I may use that term. And I've done so in full public view on the air. I'm not bashful. I have my values. He has his values. He's not an evil man. I know him privately. He's a lot different some publicly. But there were moments in the campaign where I very nearly withdrew my support on those grounds. On those grounds. But I will say this. I'm going to stir the pot a little. I think both candidates have said dreadful things and done dreadful things. And I think that's why this is a very close election. It's sort of like a long-distance runner, and you're trying to get to the finish line standing. And my sense of it is sometimes the person who says the last dumbest thing is going to lose. And I have friends of mine, I'll just share this. Trump is narrowing in the polls. It's going to be a real horse race. I have friends of mine who want to lock him up in a room, take his Twitter away, and that's it. Hope for the best. But look, he has said things, U.S. specific, that are indefensible in my value system, and I have said so.
I wanted to direct this question to you, Larry, because you were talking about your Catholic faith. And one thing that what confuses me about conservatives who sort of trumpet the rhetoric of Christian values is I really don't understand how you guys can reconcile your position on healthcare with Christian values. Like the teachings of Jesus are very clear about the moral imperative to take care of the sick. And we in this country have the lowest uninsured rate we have ever had. And I don't understand why unregulated capitalism is so compatible with these ethics. We have to have ethical standards.
Thank you.
Well, in short, I'm not in favor of unregulated capitalism. I am a free market capitalist, but with respect to particularly health and safety issues, I believe there need to be regulations. With respect to economic issues, less so. I think that the government running healthcare is a bad idea for everybody, upper, middle, and lower. I think this has been proven in other countries, particularly Europe, which itself is pulling back. And regarding delivery systems, insurance policies, doctors, hospitals, I believe the private sector will do it much better. Now, that doesn't mean we don't have to have a safety net. I'm a believer in the safety net. The trouble with the Republican Party is for years they ran around, people with pre-existing conditions and sicknesses, and let them sign up for this, let them sign up for that. My view has always been, this is a great country. We have a lot of resources. If 3 million people, which is roughly the number, have pre-existing conditions and can't afford to deal with them, then I believe the government should just give them aid. Okay? Just give them aid. I believe in the safety net. I want to be very clear on this. And you know who taught me about the safety net? That former Democrat, Ronald Reagan. And I've never lost that thought.
Thank you.
That's a question back.
Hi, this is for Professor Mead. You spoke earlier about Secretary Clinton's experience, and the potential for her to bring us back to like a stable world order. But I wonder, how do you really think that she is between Donald Trump, yeah, probably, but are you not at least at all afraid that she might not be, despite having been the Secretary of State, actually the person to bring us back to a stable world order, considering that she has dropped the ball on some pretty big, I think, issues with regards to state affairs? And she does, and it's funny that you mentioned you've been in a room with her before, and she said things and you're like, okay, yeah, that makes sense, especially considering that she's a person that has a very different kind of policy outside of that room maybe, and the thing that she'll portray to the public. So I just wonder, like, do you, is that a full blessing that you're giving her here? Are you at least some kind of worried that she might be a good political leader?
Well, I would say that my support for Secretary Clinton is probably about as nuanced as Larry's for Mr. Trump. That is, there are, in a race like this where, in every presidential race, neither candidate is actually the Messiah come to save us all with infallible wisdom from on high. It's just not happening. And so you are trying to think about two flawed human beings and the political coalitions behind them and the specific circumstances of this particular time to see who's the better fit. So yeah, certainly Secretary Clinton has made her mistakes. I think she has learned some things over the years. There's really nothing like being involved in a big national security thing that goes wrong to make you a more reflective person. But, one thing I would sort of advise you all to think about, especially the students in all of this, when you think about foreign policy, normally when you're a student in class and you're taking an exam or something, there's a right answer. If you do the homework and you think it through carefully, you will work your way to what you should say or do. The answer is 42, or whatever the answer may be. I see there are a few people here who read Hitchhiker's Guide. And so, but in things like foreign policy, there's often no right answer. You often are, I forget who it was who said, you're trying to get, many things will end up bad and many others will end up disastrous. And sometimes the difference between bad and disastrous is actually important.
Must have been Kissinger.
No, because I don't remember it with a German accent. But it's, so that I think our framework as spectators of foreign policy is often a little bit like judges at an Olympic diving contest or something, 9.3, 9.2. This is a much more complicated thing than that and harder to do well. I think with flaws, and I certainly have reservations and worries, I think of the two, it's my personal view that Secretary Clinton is probably going to handle the international portfolio better than her rival, and that's fundamentally, that's a large factor in my own thinking about who to support.
Can I just make a comment on this? Walter's one of my gurus on foreign policy, has been for many years. Look, this is not about Trump in my case. It's a personal opinion, and it may be an unpopular one, and if so, I beg your pardon. But I believe it is essential in the very near term for the Pentagon and the military sources to utterly destroy ISIS in Iraq and Syria. That's their safe havens. Now, that will not end terrorism around the world, but I believe to make America safe, to make the region safe, to send a statement out, to persuade young people that they are not on the winning side, we are on the winning side. I've heard this advice from former Secretary George Shultz. I've heard it from former Secretary Henry Kissinger. I've heard it from retired General Jack Keane. But it is my view. I believe we must destroy ISIS in Iraq and in Syria. And frankly, I'm not sure which candidate would do that. Now, you may disagree that it should be done. I appreciate that. That is my view, and I ain't sure who's the best person to do that, to be honest with you. Sorry.
Questions? I see one right up front.
So the civility in the room is overwhelming. There's
We're sorry.
I don't know who to present this to, but it is a policy issue. There's no civility in Congress. So in the House of Representatives, you have this thing called the Hastert Rule that has kept Republicans working with Democrats and passing legislation that would make sense. You have the 60-vote majority rule in the Senate. So if that helps block comprehensive and thoughtful legislation there. So if we assume that the House of Representatives is going to remain a Republican run by the Republicans, and perhaps the Senate will have a 56 to 54 majority for Democrats. How can you translate the civility that's happening here to work in the organization that has to pass all of the legislation that's going to bring about issues that you've raised tonight?
That's a question for Professor Duong.
It's funny that's directed to me because I actually do not consider civility a particularly important value from my perspective, actually. I actually find it, so there's a lot of descriptions of this election being particularly uncivil, but I remember taking American political thought classes as a graduate student, and when you read the speeches from elections in the 19th century, in the early 20th century, they're just as vicious as the current ones. I'm not totally convinced that we've entered this unprecedented age of like unsolvable uncivility, and in a lot of ways, so like, yes, like uncivil discourse is really hurtful. Yes, it's really hard to have discussion across uncivil discourse. It's also kind of the warp and weft of democracy, and I am prepared to own that. So I'm not convinced that we need, I'm maybe alone up here.
I know,
I'm not like about
I
to be
agree.
so I am not a champion of civility as like a first order value. It's something we should aspire to when we can, but there are places and times in which incivility is the proper form of political speech, and I'm prepared to own that, so yeah.
So my question's for everyone, but Deborah, it's
You have to pick one.
So Deborah, it's primarily for you though. Gender politics have played such a huge role in this election, more so than I can remember in any other election. And we have a female candidate for president, and we have Donald Trump, who so publicly objectifies women and has talked about them in such a degrading manner. And I sincerely would like to begin to understand how it is that any woman could possibly vote for him.
I was hoping I would get that question. And I have a very good answer for you, because I disagree with a lot of things Donald Trump says, but what he says does not affect my everyday life. I'm a professional woman. Things that affect my life are Obamacare. My premiums shot up to over $500 a month. I have no pre-existing condition. I can't have kids, but yet I'm forced to have maternity insurance. I definitely don't have a prostate, yet I have to have insurance that covers that. I care about trade. I respectfully disagree with Mr. Kudlow about trade. I think that's a policy that impacts my life. I have an information technology background. I was an email admin. I designed, build, maintain any kind of Microsoft network. No. But I worked around guys at my level, okay? And I was used to hearing guys brag about their conquest or their libido and things like that. So I just tuned that out, because words and rhetoric do not affect my life. They don't make my life better or worse. I care about the issues. I care about cleaning up the corruption in Washington, D.C. Both political parties have failed the people. Both political parties, it's not just Republican, it's not just Democrat. They have failed the people because K Street lobbyists of Goldman Sachs and big banks and Wall Street set the policy in Washington, D.C. They tell our congressmen what to do. So it's things like that that have an impact on why I support Donald Trump. Not words, not rhetoric. I hope that answered it.
Hi, thank you all for speaking here. I also have a question for Deborah. You mentioned, and it's been mentioned elsewhere, that one of the big selling points of Donald Trump is that he's an outsider. He's not part of the Washington scene. But I think the way that a lot of my peers see it is that the problem in Washington, the corruption, comes from the business class, and the fact that people are bought and sold by people in the business world, something that Donald Trump has publicly acknowledged. And so I don't see him as a genuine outsider because he's just another face, another side of this corrupt system. And just because he's not a politician, that doesn't mean that he's not involved in the corruption. And that's how I see it. So I'm curious what your view on this is.
Well, I know a lot of times if you have a computer system and you want it really secure, are you going to go to somebody that's never hacked into a computer system before, that's never abused the system? Are you going to go to somebody that's gamed the system, that knows how to break into computers so they know some of the ports and holes that you need to close? So, and that's from my perspective, he is an outsider. One only has to look at who all is opposing him. I mean, the Bush family, which I will be completely honest, I'm not a fan of the Bush family. So I think George W. Bush helped create ISIS. So, but when, we went after Iraq and we removed Saddam Hussein, who was a buffer. But, that's what I see going on. I mean, if you have someone that you want your home secure, are you going to have somebody that's never broken into a home that's maybe reformed? Or are you going to have somebody that's an expert at that knows what needs to be fixed?
Well, I wouldn't get somebody to secure my home who I knew was still participating in the action of breaking into homes.
No, not still participating, but our government, our intelligence agencies use hackers to help secure, reformed hackers to help secure the system because they know what needs to be fixed. And I mean, if you look at Mrs. Clinton and all of her donations and the whole Clinton Foundation is something you have to look at. That's part of the system. Are you going to change the system when you have the very people that will be affected by the changes giving you money?
I think I just want to weigh in on this because your opening point. Some businesses are good and some businesses are not good. Some churches are good and some churches are not good. If you want to get into the issue of corruption in Washington, you have to look at other interest groups besides business, and in particular, the unions. Powerful force, particularly government unions, particularly teachers' unions, who essentially shake down their members for dues that they put to political use, and the dues payers have no freedom to walk away. So some businesses are good, some are bad. Unions are also a problem. Unfortunately, we live in an era where there's a lot of corruption, and it's in the papers right now. So let me make this suggestion to you. This is utopian, but as a supply-side flat tax advocate, I have always argued, get the lowest possible tax rates, whatever that number is, 15%, 20%, I don't know, and take away every goddamn deduction on the books, everyone. No special deductions, credits, which is what keeps K Street alive. That would be the cleanest possible system. And I'll tell you something, it goes back to the tax issue. And I'll tell you this, last point. 1986, we have fabulous bipartisan tax reform act. We took the individual rates down to 28%. We took the business rates down to 35%. We probably took out about 10,000 pages of the Federal Register of tax loopholes, tax deductions, and God knows what. And K Street was living in impoverishment for a while, but they came back. So most of that stuff is returned. So if you really want to go to the crux of it, it's about money. And when you go to the crux of the money, it's about taxes, and it's about loopholes in taxes. I'm not even going to go into the federal spending issues. Last point, please allow me. You want a good job when you graduate, right? We all do. You want a good job. You can't have a good job unless you have a healthy, growing business. And you can't have a healthy, growing business unless you have capital investment to either start the business or sustain it. So my point to you is this. It's an economic point. It's worth talking about, though. I'm not being hostile. I'm just saying, here's the way I see the world. If you encumber investors and businesses with excessive tax and regulatory burdens, you not only won't start new businesses, you'll cause existing businesses to shrink. And the people who get hurt the most are not the business people. It's the middle income wage earners. And that's why I'm an advocate of corporate tax reform, among other things, and get rid of the loopholes and the deductions.
All right, we're going to try and take at least two more questions, if there are some. Or maybe we'll take a couple more. Yeah, in the middle there, stand up, please. Can we get a mic?
Hi, thank you. My question is actually for Ms. Dooley, if you don't mind answering another one.
I'll be glad to.
Great. So I noticed in the core values section that a lot of people were listing freedom, and that seems to be something that's really common among Americans. But I'm wondering if some disagreements are coming from different understandings of freedom and what that actually means to be free and to have a freedom and what should be a freedom. So I was wondering if you could maybe explain your position on what a freedom is, what are some freedoms that we have, are there any limits to freedoms, and how you feel about that?
Well, you don't have the freedom to go out and commit murder. So there are some limits, but individual freedom, the freedom to keep more of the money that you earn, the freedom to go to the church of your choice or not go to the church of your choice. The freedom to determine if you want to get married. Keep more of your tax dollars. The freedom to generate your own power and electricity. The freedom from an overreaching, abusive government. The freedom, for me, is something that's my pet peeve. I really oppose crony capitalism. I have fought many battles against public funding of sports stadiums. I believe if a billionaire wants a new sports stadium, then they should build it themselves and not be subsidized by the taxpayer. So there's a lot of freedoms out there that I'm talking about. The freedom to... Yeah, that's your choice. I happen to be pro-life, but I respect the fact you're pro-choice, and I will fight for your right to advocate for the position you agree with. So I don't say that you're wrong. I have an opinion. Everybody in this room has an opinion. We need to respect the opinion. I'm an Alabama fan. I'm a college football fan. I'm a big Alabama fan, but I live in Georgia. In Georgia Bulldog territory. Now, during college football season, some of my close friends and neighbors, we're at odds, but we're still friends, and especially when we play Auburn. But we're friends, and because we respect each other's differences. I can tell you I have fought so many battles, and I've also, sided with the labor union, on some of the battles. We helped defeat an anti-union bill in Georgia because it would affect the right to protest for Tea Parties and other groups. So I look at things issue by issue, not political party. I don't allow people to tell me, oh, you're conservative or you're Republican, you're supposed to feel this way. That's not me. I'm outside the box. I was attacked when I began to fight for solar and for clean energy, but I don't let that bother me. So, you know, freedom can be subjective, but, you know, I don't believe in corporate cronyism at all.
Yes, please, here.
By the way, I am, Larry, a dues-paying member of the AFL-CIO, and all strong conservatives should be. I'd be happy to organize you later. AFL-CIO, yeah.
So I am a longtime member and dues-paying member of the Screen Actors Guild.
As Guild, all right.
was
Just
very-
like Ronald Reagan, who was a labor leader.
It's amazing how many of us. I was UAW at Cal Berkeley. Yes, please.
I'd just like to thank you all for being here today. I had a question for Larry. Today you stated that you were against Trump's immigration plan, and after the Paris attacks, immigration. You wrote a piece that seemed to sympathize with his immigration plan, and I understand that you believe we need to defeat ISIS, but I was just wondering, what is your current stance on immigration, specifically Muslim immigration?
I've actually moved a bit with respect to border security because of the war. And I think that's very important. I don't agree that we single out religions, but I do believe, and I think Trump has backed off that most of the time, I do believe that people coming in from trouble spots need to be vetted very carefully. And I think that's going to be American policy no matter who wins in this. We've learned our lesson. My biggest disagreement with Mr. Trump is the idea of mass deportation. I don't agree. I will never agree. And the idea of house-to-house deportation forces is completely anathema to me, and I will never support it. He and I have talked about it often on the air, talked about it. I do believe sanctuary cities should be thrown out. I do believe criminals, repeated criminals, should be thrown out and deported. I do believe at the border we should have catch and deport rather than catch and release. And as far as border security is concerned, whether we have a wall, as you know, over on the San Diego side. There are other ways to have effective barriers. I'm okay with that up to a point. I'd have to see what the details are. But I can never support house-to-house deportation, never. It's not America.
This is just responding to what Ms. Dooley said about rhetoric, and I think I found something that I've been sort of trying to understand from like the other side for a while, and I just think it's really interesting how I think I found where like our opinions diverge, and I just wanted to share and see what you thought.
Okay.
So how we sort of both agree on like power to the people and grassroots organizations and the power of that, and you know, solving things from the bottom up and real change, real substantive change coming from the ground up. And I think where I diverge from that is, I guess I see rhetoric as like a very basic form of grassroots organizing in a way, or how language, and I think a lot of my peers agree, how language drives policy, and so that's how, that's why the language that Trump uses in the whole locker room talk argument is a bit just like confusing and upsetting, and I just wanted to hear your opinions on, or elaborate a little more on how you think that rhetoric doesn't necessarily affect our daily lives. Yeah.
Because him being, talking like that, that doesn't affect my Obamacare premiums. It doesn't affect my pocketbook. And if you think this election, the rhetoric is really bad, you need to look and do research with, I think it was the presidential election of 1800 between Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. They called somebody, I think it was Jefferson, called Adams hermaphrodite. He called him, said he was trying to, just things that even Donald Trump would not say.
Hasn't said it.
Hermaphrodite, he called him, is trying to marry the king's daughter, that your children will be impaled on the stake if one is elected. And it is, that's something that's important. But like I said, his rhetoric does not affect my everyday life. His rhetoric does not affect whether or not we're safe in our own country.
Can I follow? I'm going to just follow up with a question. And
I want to make a comment on it.
I think I take what you're saying, Debbie, very seriously, that his rhetoric doesn't affect your everyday life.
Right.
He's also done actions. I mean, there's at least 11 women who've come up and accused him of bringing this rhetoric into action. But it's also, I think, and this is a harder thing to talk about, the kind of rhetoric he uses does create an opening for more people to speak and act. Now, I think we can also say that Secretary Clinton, with comments like the deplorables and others, has used rhetoric that have enabled people to speak and act in ways that are problematic. And so I'm not trying to say it's a one-sided street.
Right.
But Donald Trump's rhetoric around immigrants,
Right.
women, and for the most part, minorities, who are often quite powerless in our society in many ways, especially immigrants, is not just, it may not affect some of us, but it does affect people. And I'm wondering if that's something that matters to you in the way you think about it.
It does, and I do wish he would tone down his rhetoric. I never said I agreed with him. But, the women that are coming forward, I could go out and say that Mel Gibson touched me inappropriately 20 years ago without any fact to back up what I said. And you've got to look, I'm much more offended by the way Mrs. Clinton, with Bill Clinton's accusers, the way she treated those women. So I do understand that some people don't like his rhetoric. Me specifically, and I think you're going to find out that a lot of women feel the same way, because he now has the same support from women that Mitt Romney had in 2012, or taking a second look and saying, okay, there's rhetoric. Both sides need to have a muzzle put over their mouth, so they need to watch what they say. But I'm just saying, I still support him, and it's because of issues and the way the issues would affect my everyday life, not what he's saying about women.
I intend to vote for Trump. I've said so publicly. And as of this evening, I intend to vote for Trump. But I agree with you. Language matters a lot. I really believe that. And I think that goes to the civility issue. But language matters a lot. And the English-speaking language is the greatest, most powerful on earth, and we should be literate and careful about it. Let me add one more point on this. Language and communication skills which I believe are so terribly important, affect the morale of the country, let alone the different groups. But I don't like to be an interest group guy. It affects the morale of the country. And again, I go back to my former boss. Are you a pessimist or are you an optimist? Language matters a lot. Do you have hope? Hang on a second. Do you have hope that there will, in fact, be not just legislated equality, but actual implementation of equality in all areas, gender, sex, whatever? Language matters a lot.
And I will point to the fact that during the early stages of the Tea Party movement, 2009, look at the way we were talked about and vilified. I mean, we were called radical. I mean, we were called every name under the book. Look at the way Hillary Clinton is talking about Trump supporters. I'm deplorable. I mean, just all kind of things. And she's wrong. I'm not saying rhetoric doesn't matter. I was asked, how can I support Trump with all his rhetoric? So I was explaining from my viewpoint, I'm looking at other things that are more important. I was offended by some of the things he said. I was offended by some of the things Bill Clinton said. I was offended by some of the things Hillary Clinton said. So I'm just looking at the bigger picture here and how this affects my life, how this advances liberty in our country.
I want to ask both Kevin and Rivka, since interestingly enough, they both come from states and backgrounds with a lot of conservatives in them. I imagine they both know people from where they live voting for the people they're not voting for. How has this election impacted your relationships with those people, and what is it that you find most frustrating or difficult to understand about people who you know who are voting for, in this case, Donald Trump?
I've been very, very quiet all my life about politics and continue to be very quiet about politics for a number of reasons. And one thing that I find upsetting, and this sounds backwards, I find it upsetting, and I don't mean it to sound offensive, but it's like a fact point that I'm trying to understand, is that when I look back at my high school, I had a very happy childhood, which always surprises someone when they hear like a girl named Rivka growing up in Oklahoma. And I did, and I didn't register people's politics because I was young. I even remember being sort of harassed by my brother, who said, I was probably like 7, do you sit on the left or the right? And I didn't know what he meant. But I will say that the people who were kind to me have all turned out to be Democrats, and the people who were bullies and were meaner have mostly turned out to be people who are voting on the other side. And that's not a piece of information I like, and I don't want to feel that way, and I'm obsessed with this family, which is the exception. And so there's this couple that I grew up with. I know they both had very difficult homes. One of them completely changed his name, his first name and his last name, to separate himself from his background. And she also had an abusive and difficult home. They were high school sweethearts. They married other people, had separate children, then came back together. They're amazing with their children. Their middle child has all sorts of disabilities. They're highly active and educated about different programs in education in the public schools for them. They read a lot. They're knowledgeable. They're not ignorant. They are passionate. They were passionate Cruz supporters. They hate Black Lives Matter. It infuriates them. They post about it all the time. I'm mesmerized by them. I don't understand them. I want to understand them. I know them both. I know them as good people. The things that they post make me feel insane. And I mean, I think it's like a feeling a lot of people have, and it is very different than people who are deeply involved in politics and have deeper, more nuanced, kind of detailed reasons rather than identification. I do think many people probably feel that most people's political voting has more to do with, in their heart, they feel liked or disliked. They feel disliked by liberals, so they're on the right, or they feel disliked by the sort of conservative right, they're on the left. Usually that's what it is. It's personal passions, for better or for worse. That's what I see, and I don't know. I'm just I'm floating it, sharing it.
Kevin, did you want to add something?
I can. I guess on one side I should say that I'm fairly certain my parents are Trump supporters, but we don't normally talk about politics when I'm at home. So that's one way you solve this problem, is you don't bring the politics to Thanksgiving and Christmas dinner. I will also say that it was very painful for me when Clinton called people like my parents deplorables, because I happen to actually think I don't happen to think my parents are racist. I'm actually okay with owning that, because I remember when we grew up that they were very explicit about trying to inculcate a kind of aspiration to whiteness as a form of integration for our family. So there's a very clear racialization of the way in which we are seen, in the way in which we are trying to become Americans. And they were very anxious about the black folk in our neighborhood, totally fully identified them with criminals with no evidence. But it hurt me when Clinton called them deplorables, because it really was a refusal to acknowledge their pain, which is genuine, which motivates their decision to support Trump, and the total dismissal of their pain, despite all of the ugly problems with my parents' politics. That's hard to navigate. That's hard to navigate being at a very liberal university where the pain of Trump supporters cannot be acknowledged, because it's clouded by, well, it's also it's wrapped up in all these issues of the sexism and the racism that folks accuse of Trump supporters. And what I'm kind of saying is that may be true of my parents, but I also can understand their pain, and I understand what motivates them to support Trump. And it's weird to watch that pain be erased, because they also had deeply racial views about how we were to be integrated. That makes it really hard to talk about politics home. It's hard to cut through a lot of that at a Christmas dinner table. So you don't. But these are things that I think people who, at least I think about when I go home. Those are the things that make talking about politics really tricky.
Ralph, do you want to ask a question or two? Maybe we're about 5 minutes, and then I'm going to have to end.
I'd just like to make an invitation. Let me ask one question of the audience. Don't answer verbally, just raise your hand. Does anybody here own and have on their person a smartphone, like an iPhone? Oh, what a civilized bunch. Okay. You've experienced part of a process here that I consider to be, proudly, a really profound process. And it's popping up around the country. It's being encouraged around the country. But BARD has taken a position of national leadership through the formation of dorm room conversations. If you have your cell phone with you and you wanted to go and plug into this so that tonight can be the Port Huron statement of your generation. So this becomes, so you add momentum to this, so that you participate rather than observe.
I don't think these folks know what the
I
Port
do
Huron
not have to
statement
tell
is.
them. She smiled. So, you're from, oh, she's from, so we have an authority here where the SDS issued its manifesto, which was very important to the politics of the 1960s.
That's the Students for Democratic Society, for those who don't know the SDS acronym.
And by the way, just for the record, I'm passionately anti-democratic. I'm a small R classical liberal republicanism, and I think all of our miseries today are coming from creeping democracy. But that's a living room conversation for another day. If you would like to become a participant, a leader, a follower, okay, get out your cell phones now. And Roger, where do they plug in?
You can either email me or email the Arendt Center at arendt@bard.edu. Or if you go to the...
Wait, spell please, because this is on video.
ARENDT @bard.edu. You can go to our website and under programs, click on the Free Speech Project, and under that there'll be the Dorm Room Conversation Project, and there's a form, I believe, that you can fill out to sign up, and we will send you a survey, which will allow us to, in a sense, take your political temperature and pair you with people who you disagree with for these dorm room conversations. And we're very excited for that project, and we'd love to have as many of you as possible involved.
And if you want to plug directly into Starfleet Command, feel free to go to Living Room Conversations, plural, with .org, livingroomconversations.org, and sign up. The good news, no dues. The bad news, no emoluments. But if you know, I really believe that all politics is local, and I encourage you to become a participant in dorm room conversations here, primarily at Bard, and secondarily, if you want to follow this unfolding across the entire country, livingroomconversations.org.
Yeah. The other part of the Free Speech Project that we have going is something called Tough Talks, which is bringing in speakers who are passionate, intelligent representatives of viewpoints that are often unpopular at Bard College and at other liberal universities. That doesn't mean, so the first one, actually, the inaugural Bard Tough Talks, is Monday, November 7th, this coming Monday, and it's going to be Bill Deresiewicz speaking about how we should be thinking about class as opposed to other identity issues in college admissions and college discussions. So I encourage you to come for that. You can always sign up for our newsletter at the Arendt Center and get all these kinds of information. I'd like to thank you all for staying and participating and engaging our speakers, and I'd like once again to thank our incredible speakers tonight. Thank you very much.